Welcome back to Trending in Education. Brandon Jones, Michael Palmer, and myself, Dan Strafford. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about a topic we're calling Hearables. You may have seen some news of late about advances in hearing technology. We'll talk about the implications for learning. Mike, want to check in with you. It is Teacher Appreciation Day as we release this episode.
It is. And I appreciate our teachers. I believe the teachers are our future. If they teach us well, we'll let them lead the way. All the beauty, they can unlock all the beauty we possess inside, right?
I think I've heard that before.
Oh, really?
It may be like the remix.
Maybe I have some are my spells coming? Some cryptomnesia kicking in?
Yeah, it may be that.
Yeah.
But joking aside, we do love teachers. We talked about that. Teachers have been a big part of all of our lives, and are part of the business that we're in as well. And since children are our future, I've heard that tune too.
Yes.
Teachers obviously are an important part of the lives of children, really in everywhere. So here in the United States and all around the world. So big thank you from me and from the show. We do appreciate you.
Yeah, and we've talked about it. Likening this to thanking folks in the armed services for their service. Like, it is nice to be able to set a little bit of time aside to thank the people who are sort of dedicating their lives to teaching. So it's nice that that there is a day for it. And we did a bunch of shows last year, Dan, and I think you were going to reshare and re-air some of those from. We did a whole week featuring. We still love teachers. We're just not spending a full week the same way we did last year.
Yeah, so I think join us and thank a teacher today.
Yes,
they're important and are appreciated.
Yep. Do it on social media. Do it in your child's classroom, in your own classroom. If you're still a student, make sure to say thank you. And it doesn't have to be just today. It can be all week, all month, all year. But make sure to get to it today. Mike, this topic, Hearables, something that you brought the articles to our attention. This goes in line with the wearables we talked about a lot last year, the idea of tracking steps and then how that might affect learning outcomes. What do you make of Hearables? And maybe if you could describe a little bit of exactly the technology we're talking about today.
Sure. So a hearable is a wearable that you use primarily in your ears to hear. So, wearable technology got a lot of hype, I guess, initially around Google Glass. So the idea that I could have augmented reality through glassware, something between my eyes and the rest of the world. And then I think quickly evolved into wearable technology like Fitbits and other sorts of sensors that help you monitor your physical behavior, your activity, a lot of these other things. And recently there's been an increased attention to the form factor of like an AirPod that Apple has moved towards, the idea like a wireless insert into your ear as the new form factor for wearable technology, which I think is a pretty interesting one for us to understand better. So like we've talked about the importance of, or the growing importance of audio as a format for learning. And then when you think about hearables and the idea that we could be walking around with access to audio content really through a relatively lightweight form factor that has no wires and is just inserted into your ears, is this topic. And there's also emerging technology out of the MIT Media Labs and some other places where, in a similar part of your body, there are sensors that can pick up on what you were intending to say without even having to say it. You could envision a world where, the cyborgification of humans comes in through your learnholes, through your ears. And I thought it was an interesting topic for us to explore.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. And this one article, which I assume we'll share around, which was most recently updated in April, this blog has been around since at least 2016. Saw posts from then, and it's really comprehensive and really interesting. So I encourage listeners to go give it a read. one of the things that was interesting for me is they define 3 categories of hearing aids,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of this is for people with hearing loss.
Right.
And the part of the category of hearables is there. We talked about having sort of universal design. How a lot of times something that is initially designed for people with disabilities actually ends up being helpful for everybody. It's
Yep.
think of the ramp to into a store.
Sure.
Pushing a stroller up that is a lot easier than taking the stairs.
Definitely.
So,
Yep.
so one category is hearing aids. Another is, and I like to talk about this in a bit, is personal sound amplifiers.
Yep.
And then third is just headphones or earbuds. And thinking about how the convergence of those 3 sort of discrete today categories, and the implication on learning, and the implication on the cyborgification of our human experience, I think is really interesting. And there's a lot in this article I think we can get into.
Yeah, and it ties also to screenlessness, which
Right.
which didn't win but did fine in our March Madness.
That's right.
And we've talked a lot about the movement away from screens. So like it is interesting to think about how listening to content is less consuming than screen-based content, and how you can be surrounded and immersed in audio in ways that you're less likely to be willing to do with your eyes. Like when you're on the go, when you're doing chores around the house, when you're cooking, those are all contexts in which you can be taking content in through your ears. And once the wearable tech starts, the wearable ear tech becomes contextual, I think that's when it gets really interesting. So that what I hear is based on whatever context I'm in. So like we talked about augmented reality, when I'm in a particularly like geo-fenced area, I can have access to the history of the area. I've also been thinking about like, what if I could have a very low scoring, not low scoring too, but I could have like a soundtrack to my life where based on my context, I hear different music in the background. I think it's an interesting area that has a ton of learning context too. So like you got to imagine if you're out at a museum, or if you're
Right.
taking we talk about learning outside of the classroom. If you have wearable technology that's providing audio content to you, that could also be personalized in interesting ways, depending on what you're interacting with in the world around you, where you wander or wayfind to. You get different audio tracks. It just definitely gets my wheels turning.
There was a further article here from the Stanford University, the neuroscientist and chief scientist at Adobe Laboratories. His name is Poppy Crum. We take this quote directly because I just found it amazing. The quote is, "The ear is like a biological equivalent of a USB port." So the idea here that you can plug and play with a wearable with and get the same sort of reading of the firing neurons and the different thoughts that are happening from the ear as a USB port. We've talked about the concept of learnholes, of the hearing being there. It seems like Stanford's on the same path, Mike, of trying to tap in somehow to this other way of understanding how the brain works and how we might get that data onto a smartphone, onto a spreadsheet, and maybe personalize learning a little bit further.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff, and I think I forget who was comment. This might have been your comment, Dan, too. It is interesting when you sort of explore how this kind of technology is understanding simple commands without voicing them. That'll capture thoughts that can be articulated as voice commands, but it's not really going to get at thoughts that don't turn into language.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting perspective as well. Like it makes sense, like you're not, like if you're thinking in sort of really interesting visual contexts, for example, that's not necessarily going to translate into what you would communicate to hearable tech. But the idea that more from the perspective you were putting out there, Brandon, like quadriplegics, for example, who want to send simple commands, maybe they can't even speak, they can send voice command, the equivalent of voice commands, just through what they want to articulate. You could also see how that could then turn into voice for people who can't speak. That technology is really interesting. And then when you then translate that into somebody who's able-bodied, leveraging that same capacity to activate controls. It's also the zero UI movement. You don't have to pull out a screen and have an interface. You don't have to use your voice. You can just think about something and introduce that command. The idea that could all be very close to where cochlear implants are already happening for the hearing impaired, I thought was an interesting. We haven't done a nice futurist show in a while, and I thought this stuff is nice because it seems like it's like reasonable future casting, right? Like it makes sense to think that this would be like a innovation vector coming in through your ear.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that on the sort of futurist thinking, I think one of the better sort of accessibly near-term futuristic movies I've seen the last 5 years was the movie Her, which is all about having a hearable, a wearable in your ear, with a personal assistant sort of on fast innovation. Like it's taking over his life in a way. Spoiler alert! Watch it.
Right.
But the idea that that future does feel pretty accessible, like it's pretty close. And when you think about in this article, some of the things that these devices either can do right now or are doing soon. I mentioned the personal sound amplification, selecting certain sounds to amplify. So, an example given is that you're at a lecture and you want the lecture to be louder, but you don't want the ambient noise around you to be louder, right? So, being able to pull out certain sounds and amplify those, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
The idea that you could do natural language processing and translation such that your in your wearable could translate any language. In theory, like that's actually not that far away.
Right. A babblefish, the equivalent of a babblefish.
Right. Which I think is, but directly in your ear. So it feels like you can still have that screen-free, face-to-face communication with someone who doesn't speak your language. I think that bringing people together is like one of the great ways to solve societal challenges writ large. And I think the language barrier obviously is a big one. If this could be, if hearables could be a way over that, I think that's really cool. So there's a lot of, again, like now possible capabilities and soon possible capabilities that I think makes this really exciting.
It feels like Cyrano de Bergerac's about to happen too, right? We're all going to have access to the full body of literature and artificial intelligence, augmented humanity, so that we could actually have really interesting things to say regularly fed into these types of implants.
That's right.
It's going to start vying for our attention versus our own thoughts, which is another, how do you do that in a subtle way? And then I do wonder how much of this starts to resemble like mild mental illness too.
Well, yeah, exactly right. I used to play in New York, somebody with issues or somebody on a cell phone. When you couldn't see if they were on the cell phone, they were just sort of screaming to something. Now, if everyone has these hearables in, knowing the difference of, are you talking to me? Are you talking to someone else? Are you listening to the narration of the museum you're in? I think is an intriguing move. Brandon, to your point, my oldest daughter has been diagnosed with progressive hearing loss in her right ear. And so she's been diagnosed and has a bone issue, the tiny bones on the middle ear. And she just got fitted for a hearing aid. So we, the emotions aside of explaining to her that's just like wearing glasses, getting a hearing aid, it's helping you hear, it's going to help you do better in school and the like. The hearing aid she's been fitted with is exactly what you were discussing of it tunes to the decibel level of the human voice. Now that obviously varies widely depending on who's speaking, if you bass boost your voice or not when doing a podcast, things like that. But it's insane to me that this is just the technology now. This is a hearing aid, that is already here, where it's not, this isn't for, someone going, into the military or anything like this. This is for my daughter who's going to be sitting in her classroom and able to wear something that can tune in to her teacher directly in the front of the room to help her hear better. It's the here and now. Pretty insane to see, and we haven't gotten it yet, but she's now excited about it. She's excited about the possibilities.
I think that's great, and I think that's, circumstances of needing that aside. Like I think it's great. I also think there's a stigma for whatever reason that's associated. You bring up the glasses versus hearing aid, like visual aids. So many people wear them. Is it half the population? Is it more? It's a lot,
right?
And there isn't any stigma associated with that, really. I mean, there's like I guess there's not, but it's so prevalent.
Yeah.
And that's different for a hearing aid. And really, in fact, like they're like a visual aid and a hearing aid. This is both to help improve your senses. And I think also that both as the technologies improves and as more people are walking around with things in their ears.
Yes.
I think that stigma is gonna go away. And I think that's great. I mean,
Right.
Obviously the population that has a diagnosable hearing loss is smaller than that has a visual loss, but that's a real consideration. And there's, you think 50 years ago, like you were at a loss for more than just hearing. Like you lost some of the human communication, human interaction.
Yeah.
There's, you felt that stigma, I imagine. But I think that's a great part of the future around this is, not just accessibility, but is sort of a leveling and removal of any sort of ostracization of folks who have hearing loss.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you think about the way your glasses and your frames are part of your style and your visual brand, that's generally not the way hearing aids are understood. But as they become more portable, and you could put them in, take them out, even like the case for AirPods. Like there's a lot of really interesting innovation that have happened around wireless technology for headphones that makes things that never would have made it through market testing because they're too easy to lose. Now that like there's kind of like a nice little pack that you can just comfortably place these attachments in, and then be in control of, okay, it's time for me to break this out. It's a context where I need to hear better. I'm going to put them in. Not to mention the other dimension, which is more, implants. I think it's going to be an interesting area of technology to look for increased blending of human and technology. But I do feel like we almost need the equivalent of on-air lights. Like I want to know
Exactly.
like when like somebody has like a little blinker like on their forehead or maybe at the base of their skull or something that is like taking other inputs right now. Feel free to talk, but I may be distracted. Just because like I do think the social norms around attention are already really problematic. Just having anybody pay attention to you these days is increasingly difficult. And then the idea that they may be listening to like a hyper personalized narration that will give them a competitive advantage, even if they're still listening to you, they're going to be more tracking that other track, and without any contextual clues. I think it's going to get awkward.
Yeah, I think we need language for that. Like, like I have had I like to call them earbuds because that reminds me of the
fantastic cinematic tour de force.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've had earbuds, the basketball playing dog.
Yes.
For a while, for 2 years maybe now. So I was not the earliest of adopters, but I was pretty early.
Yeah.
I walk to work every day, as I mentioned in this podcast, and I listen for basically an hour a day.
Right.
And I'm walking through the city with my earbuds in.
Yes.
At all times, and I do like this I point in my ear thing if someone's talking to me, but I wonder if there is a language that we could develop. Like, are you because when both people, like, imagine this becomes more and more prevalent and more people have them in at something approaching all times. Like, are you waving? Like I don't know. We need to come up with some language there. I'll workshop it a little bit. But like, are you doing, like, if you can have some sort of shorthand that says, are you actually in this conversation or not? And if you're not, then NBD. right? But I think having some way so it's not just a bunch of people always pointing at their ears, but things we can say too, I think would be helpful.
Not to mention, you're at the opera and you happen to be listening to the basketball game, and like no one. That's where I'd want to be able to turn my indicator off, right? Like I would just want to be able to quietly see how the Mets are doing as Pagliacci is. But when he's in his final, aria, I'll turn down the Mets game. But like it is an interesting way where you're going to kind of want, like it's the whole JOMO thing too. Like if you can always take any sort of audio input into your mind, how much do you want to let yourself filter multiple inputs versus focus? And just be present,
I think that you said this, I'm just building on something you said, but our attention is already so there's so many demands on it that I think it's easier to have a fractured attention than to be really attentive.
Yes.
So that may just be like a visual cue that you are paying attention to something else.
Yes.
But like the base state that we're comparing that to is already pretty problematic.
It's true.
Yeah.
And you have the signaling now of I'm looking at my phone. And I think increasingly that signal will become less obvious. I think people will be picking up on feeds that are less subtle than, I'm going to pull my phone out. And like even now, like the real social faux pas is like pulling the phone out at the wrong time. It's a faux pas, but it's also a way to just be like, I'm ready to ignore you. And I'm choosing to value my screen time over my signaling my attention to you. That's going to start to become more nuanced and multimodal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to learn about hearables, right?
For sure.
Yeah. There is. I look forward to tapping my ear to signify that I'm done with the conversation and moving on to whatever my hearable has for me. I'll be a fan of that. And an anecdote from my daughter, the doctor, when describing the hearing aid, said, you'll wear it for school, and when you don't want to listen to your parents, you can take it out. And she's latched on to that. And I look forward to the day where she pulls out the hearing aid and says, sorry, Dad, can't hear you, and walks away from me.
Yeah, I think that's good. We as glasses wearers, Dan, you and I at least both, there is actually something about taking off your glasses that is, it's providing some rest, or it's there's reason to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the removal, especially if the hearing aid is something that is easily removed.
Yes.
There probably is some benefit to that. I like the way, it sounds like you've done a great job, and her doctor has too, as selling this as a, as having benefits as well. But I like the just when it's time to stop listening to your parents. I think that's good.
She has been telling her friend she is now 0.1% bionic, that she has as a hearing aid. So she has all the talking points down as she gets ready for it, and is looking forward to it. She actually got to pick the colors, as Mike was saying, a design effect on one of them. So we'll report back on how it works for her as we go on. We'll talk hearables again in the future. We'll talk wearables. Obviously, this technology continues to emerge and will influence the way we learn, the way we interact, and the way we go about our everyday lives. Big topics here on Trending in Education as we go forward. Thanks so much for listening. As always, you can find us over on Twitter at Trending in Ed. Same on Facebook, trendingineducation.com. You can find us as well. Always want to hear from you as well. If there are topics or articles that you want to get our attention to, feel free to share them via email or via Twitter or Facebook. We'd be happy to take a look and maybe even make them a topic here on a future episode of Trending in Education.